Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Most Important Game podcast. I'm Paul Monahan, and my mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best. I help my clients to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more. Speaking of enjoying more, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. It's been, and speaking of struggle, it's been a struggle to get our next guest to the platform here because of he's one of the busiest guys I know. He's been traveling all over. He's going to tell us a little bit about that. But this is Bob Schoultz, and Bob is a retired U.S. Navy captain and Navy SEAL commander living in an undisclosed location, I think, Bob, right, in Southern California.
Imperial Beach.
Oh, he blew his cover already, Imperial Beach. But let me tell you a little bit about Bob, and then we're going to jump into some really fun conversation around how to perform at your best when it means the most. So Bob spent 30 years in the Navy in a number of different theaters of operation: Europe, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia as well. And he did all this after completing a philosophy degree at Stanford. I want to talk a little bit about that, Bob. Bob is an avid golfer, so lots to talk about there. But more importantly, Bob has remained active in various leadership, mentoring, and personal growth pursuits since his retirement from the Navy, and I appreciate his take on many aspects of human performance. I think you will too. Bob is one of the most well-read, well-traveled, and curious people that I know, and I feel super lucky, Bob, to have been introduced to you a number of years ago and take a bunch of trips and have a lot of terrific conversations. But I want to welcome you to our conversation today. Good to have you, Bob.
Great to be here, Paul. We last saw each other a lot in the mountains of northern Italy, I believe.
You are correct. An amazing Knowles trip in the Dolomites of Italy. Absolutely fantastic trip. The people were amazing, and the scenery was incredible, and the experience was absolutely unforgettable. So thank you for that, Bob. Hey, I wanted to start our conversation. I just said you're one of the most well-read and curious people I know. What have you been reading lately?
Well, I just finished two books that were recommended to me. I'm trying to figure out which ones I'm going to tell you about because I got a lot of them. Right now, I'm reading.
Hey, we got time.
I'm right now reading Walter Isaacson's biography of Einstein. I'm actually listening to that. I also just finished The Wager, which is about a British ship in the 1750s that was sent from Britain into the Pacific, and they had a shipwreck, and the survivors, the very few survivors, ended up on a deserted island. This is a true story, and they were stuck there, no communications, no ships going by, and what it kind of turned into a little bit of the Lord of the Flies sort of situation. But somehow a bunch of those guys did get back to the UK, and sort of what happened afterwards. And fascinating story, followed by James Cook's third voyage to look for the Northwest Passage in Pacific. And on that trip, he stumbled upon a group of islands, which we now call Hawaii, and was the first European to record having been there. And on his way back from looking for the Northwest Passage, he stopped in Hawaii again. And it's well known that he was killed there by the natives. And there are a whole lot of journals and a lot of information about that. Another fascinating story. That one was by what's his name? Hampton Sides, which is the fourth book of his I've read. Does nice. Great historical narrative. Anyway, I also did read James. James is a book that's getting a lot of publicity. It's the Huckleberry Finn, the story of Jim, who was the African American on Huckleberry Finn's raft. But Everett Percival wrote a novel of Huckleberry Finn from his perspective. It is fascinating. It's getting lots of awards. Recommended.
Oh, that's really cool. That's awesome. Let me ask this: How did you get to be such a voracious reader? Like, when did that start for you?
I started when I was a kid. I used to like to wake up in the morning on the weekends and just read a book, and so I'm kind of still reading in bed is kind of how I do my reading. Usually at night before I go to sleep. Um, and now sometimes most mornings I'm either getting up to play golf or ride a bike, but I do read some in the mornings. And I just it's a fascinating way to expand your. You can only experience so much yourself, and you can expand that uh, aperture by taking in the experiences of other people.
No doubt. Anything that comes to mind when you think about, the most memorable books that you read when you were a kid?
Wow, when I was a kid, um, I remember The Good Earth. I remember reading The Good Earth when I was in junior high school. It had a big impact on me. I also kind of do a blog post, and I thought through what were the five novels that had the most impact on me, and that was a hard decision. And I kind of came up with the five novels that and why they had most impact on me. And then I listed about 20 books that were in the running, which still think, and I still go back to that list because right now I'm enjoying rereading books that I have read before that I really liked, and it's a whole different experience 20 years after the first time you read it.
Yeah, it's like, today's the first day of me being this age, you know what I mean? And everything that, the way I experience the world today is different than I did 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
I'm going to see things and have, I'm going to read a book differently than I did 20 years ago. So that's really cool.
I'm really enjoying rereading the books that had a big impact on me 20, 30, 40 years ago. And you know what? They have another big impact on me, a different impact, but it's I love going back and rereading books I loved the first time. So
Oh yeah, that makes total sense. And I hear a lot about that. I was just with a group of golfers, and some of whom have picked up the book that I just wrote. By the way, this is probably a good time for a sponsor. We got a sponsor moment here, Bob. Hold on one second here. We got to go to the book cam here. This moment brought to you by The Most Important Game. Play better, struggle less, enjoy more. And by the way, Bob, you might remember this, but you were you actually wrote an endorsement for me for this book. Should we go to the endorsement? I think we should do that. Let's do that. Oh, look at that, Bob. Okay, for the viewers, or sorry, for the listeners at home, I'm going to read this quote. This is from the endorsements of The Most Important Game. So this is a great quote from Bob Schoultz. Bob says, "If you ain't," first of all, he starts out with a quote from his dad. This is from Admiral Dutch Schultz, if I have that correct. Is that right, Bob?
that's correct.
And he says, the quote is, "If you ain't having fun doing it, you ain't doing it right." Bob says, that was my father's motto in life. And he loved playing golf up until a couple of months before he died at 92. That could also be the title of Paul Monahan's book. The mental game is not just about technique. It's about attitude, relaxing, and making golf a source of joy in our lives. The Most Important Game is full of great hints to increase enjoyment, yield better shots, and decrease the stress and frustration that leads to bad shots and worse golf. So thanks for that, Bob, by the way. Appreciate that.
Well, that's a challenge. I mean, I had to remind myself of that yesterday as I struggled around the course, fighting my swing, and the thing was that the game I played on Monday, the day 3 days earlier, was one of my best rounds in several months. I thought I had it. Then I went out and had one of my worst rounds in quite a while. And so, but I had a lot of fun. I mean, because I was with great people outdoors. I had some great shots in there. And so the score is just a number. Nobody cares what that number is except maybe me. Um, and I
True,
bought a little bit
true.
of beer for my buddies, but so what?
I love the idea, Bob, that there's 8 billion people on the planet. And, you know, if you want to really understand, what that number is that people that don't care about your golf score, it's roughly 8 billion, by the way, plus or minus one or two.
Well, and I don't care, and I'm giving up caring that much. I'd still like to get my handicap down, but it's a nice to have.
Yeah, I think the word indifference comes up for me, and I spent a lot of time in the with the Graves at Golf Academy and the Mo Norman single plane swing, right? So Mo Norman used to say, I think you and I have talked about this, Bob, but he used to say, I like to play with an alert attitude of indifference,
Great line.
right? So this idea of how much can I care just a little bit less?
Yeah, maybe sometimes a lot less, and
A lot less.
and being sure that you also care about the good shots that your fellow players are making, giving them lots of kudos when they. I love doing that, and I love getting those when I do hit a good shot. So that's all part of making the game fun.
I agree. Have you and I talked about the Chuck Hogan quote where he says the key to confidence in golf is just doing two things. And the first is celebrating and emotionalizing the functional shot. And the second is seeing everything else as feedback, not failure.
Yep. We were talking yesterday. You've heard of this fellow named Jocko Willink.
Yep.
He's written a bunch of books. He's a former Navy SEAL, but his line is, when things go wrong or they're not what you hope for, his line is good. And because he tells a story about how guys came to him while they were in Iraq, and they said, "Sir, the helicopters can't get here until before." And he looks at them and goes, "Good." And they go, "What do you mean good?" He said, "Well, that's going to give us an opportunity to test our flexibility and readjust our plan, and we're going to be able to learn from this and become better for it." And so every time anybody came to him with a problem, he would look at him and go, "Good." And his bottom line is, there's a silver lining in every one of these things. It's, for anything that goes wrong, it's up to us to find it. And so yesterday on the golf course, I don't know what I did. I think I mishit a shot and went into the sand trap. And I looked at my buddies and I went, "Good," and we all laughed.
Good is good.
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So tell me about how you got to the Navy, Bob.
Well, it was easy because I grew up with my father being in the Navy, and so, and just to also clarify, my son is also, he's an active duty Navy SEAL, and he's also just selected for captain. So I mean, we've got this 3 generation thing going on. And I was going to go to the Naval Academy my whole growing up, and then I decided about my senior year in high school, maybe I don't want to do that. And I decided to, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I decided to go ROTC, and I got accepted. I think I got a diversity quota for Stanford University. I didn't. All of my friends there when I was there had much higher SAT scores and were much smarter than I was, but they didn't have very many people from a little town in Virginia. So anyway, so I decided to go ROTC, and then at the end of that, they paid for my education there. I owed the Navy 4 years, and so I was going to do my 4 years and get the hell out. And that was my plan. I actually had my letter in to get out, but I kind of kept getting offered really neat jobs. I said, "Well, I'll get out later. Let me take this job, and then I'll get out later." And well, hey, boy, I don't think I can find anything on the outside that I'd rather do than that job. I'll do that, and then I'll get out. And I did that for 30 years.
A good stretch of finding all the right things to do.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I was
great.
lucky. I had a lot of fun, and it was a great way to spend 30 years.
Love that. And you studied philosophy at Stanford, if I am not mistaken. Is that right?
That's correct.
Why philosophy? And then what well, I'll start with that. Why philosophy?
Why not? I'll throw that
Why
back at
not?
you.
Okay, good as
I
answer as
mean,
any. I just was, yeah.
you know, I don't have I don't have a good aptitude for science, math, and engineering studies. I'm kind of a humanities guy. That's kind of why I've grown up reading mostly literature, and so I was looking at different things to study, and I took a course. I took a course in philosophy of religion, and I loved it. It was just fascinating to me how people thought about religion, the existence of God, where that fits in a life with or without God, and all of that, and that kind of moved me in that direction. And I love studying philosophy. I still do. I taught ethics for almost 12 years after I got out of the Navy.
How did that experience then shape what you were to do next over the next 30 years? How did being in that study of philosophy, create, if it did, I'm assuming it created a foundation for you on sort of how the world's supposed to work.
Well, uh, I would say that people ask, what is philosophy? How would being a Navy SEAL? Well, it has a lot to do with kind of life in general, in any particular position, understanding why you're doing what and what your values are, and it fit well with my the reading I did, and the idea of thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and what kind of person you want to be, and whether what you're doing now is taking you down that path or taking you off that path. What a lot of people think they want to be this person, but their activities and the things they do and the decisions they make take them over here, and but they don't recognize that hypocrisy, and and so in a leadership position in the Navy, you're guiding people as well as having to judge people, and also make decisions on how to evaluate them, which is going to affect their career. And so those are all kind of pretty big personal character values issues. And having done some thinking in it helped me.
What should people know about um, the Navy SEALs ethos and culture and what it takes to succeed in a pretty elite environment, a pretty high stakes environment too.
Well, there is a Navy SEAL ethos which you can find online. Type in Navy SEAL. It's a one-page document, and it's sort of aspirational, not really descriptive, and and it's a goal, and the kind of values we want our young guys and our Navy SEALs to have. Uh, we have a little bit of tension in the command. I mean, in the community between that aspirational goal and then the behaviors of some of the guys in the community, and that's a leadership issue we've been struggling with since the Vietnam War and before, I'm sure. Um, so there's and the culture that I did a little work on. We've got this official Navy SEAL ethos. Okay, so that's aspirational. What is the descriptive ethos? What is the no
It's the
kidding?
ideal, right, Bob? I mean, it's
Well, the
like this is
aspirational
what
one
we're
is the
shooting
ideal.
for.
The
Yeah.
ideal. Well, what's the one that's no kidding driving the guys who are doing the job? And that I was curious about that, and so I asked a whole lot of people. I came up with 3 points. Um, uh, One, you've got to be a good operator, meaning you have to know your job and do it well. Two, you have to be a good teammate, and and so you can be really good at shooting, diving, jumping, all that, but people expect you to be a good teammate. And three, you need to be also a good person, a good. In the SEALs right now, it's a good man because we don't have any women in the SEALs yet. But so good operator, good teammate, good man, and uh, and so the first two, good operator, good teammate, are pretty obvious, and they hold themselves accountable for that. the good man piece is a little bit more amorphous, and we have in the past tolerated guys who are really good operators and good guys, but who in their private life or even in combat did some things that were not consistent with the good man uh, value there. So uh, that's an ongoing leadership effort. It's easy to measure a good operator. We have standards for those. The good teammate thing is kind of also fairly well regarded. How much your teammates want to be with you and want to work with you and want to go on liberty with you and trust you. And then the good man piece is a little more complicated as far as how that applies to being a good SEAL. But I also argue that those standards are pretty consistent with the corporate world as well. Do you know your job well? Uh, are you somebody that people want to work with and they trust you and that you contribute to the team? And are your personal lives and personal values consistent with the kind of person we want to work with and that our corporation or company uh, wants to have associated with us? So it's not that unique. Just the job is a little different than it is in the corporate world, and
I
we
was
have a
thinking
whole process.
exactly that as you were, yeah, thanks. But yeah, I was thinking exactly that as you were talking through that. And I'm like, yeah, there's definitely, you know, I know, definitely have known people that fit in the, excellent operator, um, pretty dependable as a teammate. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure we could define teammate, and maybe the way I define teammate is, different than some people that I've seen. And then the third element of, are they a good person? Are they a good man? Are they a good, they really struggle and end up being, in some cases, either the source of lots of problems in that organization, or they're asked to leave the organization because they just don't fit.
Yeah, it's awkward. My father had a fellow working for him at one point who was a great guy and was great at his job, and but just abused his wife. And my father cut him away. And and he and then my father kind of gave him away back when they got divorced and he married again, and then he again was didn't treat his new wife well, and after that he came back to my father and wanted to reestablish contact. My was I'm done. We are done. I and so that's the kind of thing that we've all encountered that a bit. It's awkward. It's hard. It's hard when you've got somebody who's really good at their job and people enjoy being with them, and then there's a dark side of them that comes out, and you kind of go, and then we have that, and we have that in the SEAL teams. Guys come in for different reasons, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and and some of them are not necessarily honorable. Interestingly, when my son was thinking about what he wanted to do, whether he wanted to go in the Navy, and he said, "I don't want to go be a SEAL. I don't want to kill anybody." And I said, "That's good. I'm glad to hear that. We don't want people who come into the SEALs because they want to kill people. We want people who are coming to the SEALs who are willing to, if that's what's called for by the nation. You have to be willing to do that." And so, and that my son has been in a lot more combat than I have because he came in right at the beginning, right after 9/11. And he's been to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, and all those places. And so, but I think that's an example there.
What, the SEAL teams has been in the consciousness of our society for, well, a lot more just in the last 20 years, or maybe even 15 years. I would say probably 20 years ago, we didn't talk about Navy SEALs too much. After the Bin Laden raid, it seems to me like we talked a lot more about the Navy SEALs. What do people get wrong about the Navy SEALs from your perspective?
Just your. I'll digress a bit here. When I was going through SEAL training back in 1975, I'm trying to impress some young lady at a bar and tell her I'm working with the Navy. I'm working with the SEALs, and she said she thought I was working at SeaWorld.
Of
Because
course.
back then, when I was in college and I decided I wanted to go try out for this program, most of my friends had never heard of them. At that point, people had kind of heard of frogmen and underwater demolition teams because there had been a movie about that back in the 50s. But SEALs were pretty much a fairly secretive organization back in the 60s and 70s. And so, um, to your question about what do people get wrong, I think there's a certain mythology around seals that a lot of the seals like to feed. They're the biggest, the baddest, the strongest. They can leap tall buildings in a single bound. They can do all that stuff. And frankly, when I was a young kid, I wanted to kind of feed that too. Hey, I want you to think that I can do all this amazing stuff. I couldn't do anything, but and television and movies have sort of fed that. But most, I tell you, what surprises a lot of people is how normal most Navy SEALs look and are. They're 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 just normal human beings. I took a group of people to I think it was I know what it was. It was a Knowles advisory board meeting that I gave them a little tour, and I introduced them to a young man who came up and said, "Oh, Captain Schultz, good to see you." And I said hello, and I introduced him to these people I was with, and they chatted with him, and then he moved on. I said, "I'm surprised. That just looks like a normal kid, 22, 23-year-old kid." Yeah, he is. He's just a normal kid who is mentally tough and physically tough enough to have gotten through our training, and he wants to be part of our organization, and he's willing to go do hard things in strange places and do what our country tells him to do. But other than that, um,
Yeah.
and then there are guys like
It's definitely
Jocko, who is sort of this kind of like big, strong, gorilla looking guy, and he's kind of got this voice like this. And I get up at 4 in the morning and I do 25, and I do 100 pull-ups, and I mean he's an impressive guy, but he's also not your standard normal Navy SEAL too. I mean, so
right. The outlier seems to be the what we have fallen in love with culturally
people
as
want to,
our
yeah, people want to
avatar
believe,
for
yeah, people
yeah.
want to believe in these mythological heroes.
Yeah, and my limited experience to your network, Bob, um, it's absolutely mm, almost 100% not the case. You have people, my size and which is not very big, and just people that I think my perspective is um, they knew how to persevere and do hard things, and they were smart and they were great teammates. They knew what it meant to, put the team first and get the mission done. And that's my perspective.
Well, you got to meet some really, I think, pretty outstanding examples on the hike in the Dolomites. I mean, you had Gardner Howe, retired as a vice admiral,
Oh my goodness.
just one of the kindest, mellowest guys you'd meet. Roger Herbert, who has got his PhD in political theory, and there are a few other Navy SEALs on that trip too, I think. And then there were some other people who is like yourself who easily could have been if you'd gone a different path.
All right, so Bob, so the premise of this whole idea, the most important game, which is the title of my book, but it's also a bit of a philosophy for me, right? The idea is that you know in any performance realm, there's the outside game, and that's like the stuff of that we can see and get our hands on, and it's typically the stuff that's moving around outside of us. There's that piece of it. It's also the skill development, right? So if I'm a shooter, it's how well can I, shoot. If I'm a golfer, it's how, what do my swing mechanics look like, right? That's the outside game. But then there's another game, there's another dimension of performance, that is also important, and you mentioned it earlier, but it's this, the game that goes on between our head or between our ears. And it's what I call the inside game or the most important game. And so I'm curious if you think back to your time in the Navy, what are some of the most important lessons that you can think of that sort of speak to this idea of, hey, there's times when I performed really, really well. There's times when I'd like to have a mulligan on that thing. And maybe what are some of the dynamics that lead to both?
Well, in the performance as an officer in the Navy, the things that early on as a junior officer, you have to demonstrate your tactical skills, and that just comes through practice and repetition and following clear guidance from people who have been there and have a whole lot more experience. And you have to develop a certain degree of competence in that. But then you move on to leadership, and you leave the skill functioning piece to the petty officers, the enlisted guys who will stay in that practical world, and the officers move on to managing and leadership. And so the in that role, I think being the things that have had the most that I've felt have been most important to me have been finding the balance between compassion and understanding for my subordinates, as well as taking care of the long-term goals of the organization. And sometimes there's compromise one for the other, and sometimes the other for the one. And knowing when to go ahead and give somebody a mulligan, and when maybe they deserve a second mulligan, or when the indications are that this is egregious, and we're going to go ahead and take a hard line on this. I think that's one of the key challenges. I think that I managed pretty well. I found that given somebody, if my gut said give this person another chance, and I gave him another chance, most of the times it was a good call. I mean, I made a couple of mistakes. I gave somebody another chance, and they let me down again, and they didn't let me down after
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
Uh, but and I think part of that comes from the humility of having screwed up enough when I was younger to realize that I am doing okay here, but other people gave me those mulligans. I mean, just an aside, I joined UDT 21 and was actually recommended by my first boss to get thrown out of this teams within the first months of being there.
Really?
Yeah, and I had a difficult conversation with my commanding officer, who said, "Your platoon commander says you don't belong here, and he didn't want you in his platoon." And so I've got to decide what to do about that. And I just got done with SEAL training, and that was hard. I put a lot of work to get there, and I'm not used to failing. And I asked for permit. I want to stay with this group. Give me another chance, boss. I will. And and he gave me the other chance, and it worked out. I learned a whole lot from that. And it happened again. Another time, I almost got fired from being a platoon commander. And I got another chance, learned from that, and then grew into something. It took me a while. I guess I'm a slow learner. Some guys figure this stuff out right away. I'm not. Practical skills and practical insights are not my forte. I usually have to learn a lot of things the hard way, but when I learn them pretty well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
back to your question, what are the things that mostly it's been kind of people oriented things, and whether or not to let somebody coach them, give them a chance, see how hard they try to get better. And at some point, somebody's got to play hardball, though. That's hard for me, frankly. I've never done well at what I think Jack Welch says, that you can't be the boss if you're not willing to fire people, but you can't be the boss if you like to fire people. Now, Jack Welch is not exactly my model of great leadership, But I think that's a good point, though. I mean, you do have to be able to play hardball, but if you like playing hardball, nobody's going to want to work for you.
Yeah, I think there's tough decisions have to be made in a leadership role. There's no question. And sometimes that involves disinviting a person from the team, I suppose, right? I mean, there's no question about that. Um, I think that, to your point, like leading with the, all right, you step out of line, boom, you're fired, look, you can do whatever you want as a leader, but there are consequences.
Well, and
I'm
the context always is important. I mean, Elon Musk. One of the books I recently read is his uh, um, Walter Isaacson's biography of him, and he just fires people left, right, and center. But Elon Musk is kind of an anomaly. I mean, what would work for Elon Musk would not work for me, and what works for me would not work for Elon Musk. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to in any way undersell his many achievements. It's worked for him in his context, but he's got a lot of bodies in the trail.
no question, and yeah, the fascinating thing about his story, like he has a language set around that whole thing, like where he's like, all right, if you can't do this, resignation accepted, or he says something to that effect, right? And um yeah, I think that's a I've only been around one person that I think was sort of close to an Elon Musk, and it was hard being around that person. And there were, to your point, there was a lot of collateral damage around that. Actually, I take that back. Two people in my career that I've been around, and lots of collateral damage. Not everybody wants to be in that environment, but some people are okay in that.
Well, and Elon Musk doesn't really care. I mean, that's part of his personality. He's got this Asperger's disease. He doesn't understand empathy except from an intellectual perspective.
Right.
And I think empathy for most of us is pretty important. And it's also telling. I listened to his interview with Joe Rogan, and people say, and Joe Rogan says, a lot of people wish they could be like you, and he goes, trust me, they don't want to be. They don't want my life. They don't want to be me. He's not a happy man. He's driven though.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, there's a long history there. I mean, it started with an abusive dad. I mean, right? We can go all the way back to where that those seeds were planted.
He's pretty authentic though. I mean, what you see is what you get. There's no deceit there, and I
Yeah,
admire.
I think you're right. I think you're right. It's almost like he's learned how to transcend any fear. I'm not saying he doesn't have fears today, but I think from a performance perspective, I think that there's only a handful of thoughts, unproductive thought patterns that we have to pay attention to. So it's fear, frustration, doubt, shame, and quit. That's sort of my philosophy. You've got 5 of them, right? Of course, I think of this on the golf course first, Bob, because that's where life really is,
Well,
as you know.
I mean, I think that you have to pay attention to fear, though. I mean, sometimes there's a real important message there.
It seems like that part of the behavior that you see from Elon Musk, though, is because, like in his mind, he has stepped into so much stuff that fear doesn't register unless it's amplified like 100 times compared to me, right? My fear meter might get triggered, but for Elon Musk, it's a level that's much higher before his fear meter gets triggered.
It's an amazing story. I really recommend reading that biography. But people kind of go, Elon Musk, I hate that guy. I don't want to read. I said, no, there's a lot of lessons in there, and he's a pretty. I mean, he's on the cutting edge of so much, which is changing the world now, and how he got to where he is. He was right up against the. He had one foot over the cliff so many times, and he just said, "No, we're doing it." And it's an incredible story. It's one of the more incredible stories, I think, of the 21st century right now. So, in any case, I'm not sure his lesson. Reading his biography or Steve Jobs' biography, it's a challenge to kind of distill out of those. And Walter Isaacson wrote both of those, by the way. And I think
Hmm.
both
He
both of
did.
them were at the request of the subject. I mean, Jobs asked Isaacson, and I'm pretty sure Musk asked Isaacson as well. But to
He did,
distill
and he
out of
spent two
those
years
guys,
with him.
yeah, well, clearly because he's got so much inside information. But I think that, like I was about to say, to distill out of these two guys' lives lessons would apply to you or me is an interesting challenge because they were different kind of men.
Yeah, I think that it's really fascinating too because we want to romanticize these kinds of figures, right? And it's easy to do because of their accomplishments. I mean, it's incredible. You and I have talked about this, Bob, but one of our boys is he's in the space, as I like to say. He's in the rocket space in at Kennedy Space Center, and so he's around this all the time, and he and I are talking about it all the time. And um, he has good friends who they work at SpaceX, and it's a grind, man. It is right, but they're doing incredible things, and you find out in the book that it's all because he had this vision that started 25 years ago that, oh my gosh, we need to become interplanetary as a species. We need to go to Mars. Now, agree with that or not, you know, that's his mission. Everything he does, it turns out, is to support that mission. That's pretty incredible.
There's not a lot of people that work for him for a long time because it is a full on. He doesn't care if you have a private life. He doesn't care if you have any life other than what
Mm-mm.
he's doing, and he says that up front. And so there are a few people that have stuck with it. I'm not sure whether they may not have PTSD. We have a little bit of the same thing with our kind of premier SEAL team. It is a sprint all the time working there. I was exhausted. I was there for a couple of years, and I was exhausted when I left. My son was there for 3 years. When he left there, he was ready to get out of the Navy. He was so fried, and it took him a good year to get his energy back. And so I think the same thing with. But there are guys that stay there for years and years, and I think Elon Musk's organization. I know several people who've worked for him as well, and they said it was really intense. It was really interesting, and it was a lot of pressure. And after 2 or 3 years, I'd had it. I had no. I'd used up burned all of my matches.
Why don't these guys ever? It seems to me that there's a huge opportunity here to step into this on-off cycle, right? Which, a guy like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs was the same way, it seems, and there's others that are like this. They're always on, and they expect everybody else to always be on. But it's fairly well known that every elite level, any performance team, you've got to have this on-off cycle. So why is it always that you hear these stories where, oh gosh, we were on all the time, 24/7, 365? That just doesn't seem rational to me.
Well, these people are anomalies. I mean, most of the rest of us don't want to live that way. I don't, and I'm not that driven. But God, I'm glad we do have people like that though, because they're the ones that. What was Steve Jobs' famous line? Is about crazy people are the ones that change the world. You can go on Google and say, "What's that great line by quotes by Steve Jobs?" It'll be in there.
Yeah. He used to say, "Stay crazy," right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But in any case, yeah, there's different strokes for different folks, and if you want to run in the fast lane, I ride. I do a lot of cycling now, and I ride with a bunch of guys who that's their whole life, and their training schedule drives their life, and they win the big competitions. So one of the guy I ride with, I ride with him once or twice a week. He's the senior California state champion, and he doesn't go on vacations with his son like I do, and he doesn't do the other stuff I do. But he's very strict and rigorous with his training schedule, and he's driven, and he's achieving great things. God bless him.
Yeah. And I'm wondering though, even somebody like that, like doing something very hard that's very physical, he must have some kind of an on-off training cycle, right? Where if he's getting ready, he can ramp up to the big race, but then he's going to ramp down afterward. There's got to be a recovery, and I guess that's what, um, like after reading the Musk, one of the big takeaways for me reading the Musk biography was there's never a ramp down until he's about to, drop from exhaustion or whatever. So that ramp down it seems to me like there's an opportunity there. Um, and, and at the end of the day, people get recovery happens for people, the physical and mental and emotional recovery, and then they can step back into being awesome. And,
Yep,
anyway, just kind of curious about
that'd be
that.
the case with guys like you or me, or and then there's people, men and women who um, they're they got that one speed. I wouldn't want to live that way. I sometimes define myself as a prince of mediocrity. I choose to be mediocre at a whole lot of things rather than particularly good at any one thing.
Well, that's a pretty fun. You have a pretty fun life in terms of
I
being
mean,
able to do a
it's
lot of different
the one
things
I
in that.
choose. It's the one I choose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally get that. Totally get that. Um, what's the best advice you got, or the best modeling that you saw in others that you thought, oh, that's the key to success, and I'm going to do that.
Well, it begs the question of what do you mean by success? And at this point, success is kind of a much more sort of holistic life definition rather than getting promoted to a certain position or getting
Hmm.
so. And going back into the Navy for just doing I mean, I had jobs that I didn't want, and my father told me when I was actually in the possibly in danger of getting fired as a young ensign. He says, just do the best you can and love that guy to death. The guy who would, and I did, and then constantly trying to do the best I could. But there's also again that balance between being a full-on organization man and also holding on to your identity as what your personal values are. And I don't I don't subscribe to or prescribe giving your whole identity to your organization, which is easy to do in the Navy and the service because it is such it's such an all-encompassing culture, and people get so much personal satisfaction being part of that team and with that sense of purpose and whatnot. For me, it's always been important, and I think for most of the guys in the SEAL teams that I've worked with, that I've respected, have kept part of them aside from that, and have fed, nurtured that part as well. And I've done that largely through my reading. I kind of took up the fiddle when I was a lieutenant, and I still do that. Um, and then other hobbies like
Seeing you
that.
do that live very well, by the way. That was in San Diego, maybe a
Oh, you
couple of
came
years
by.
ago
You
on a
came to the.
visit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My greatest achievement as a fiddle player was getting my son into it when he was like 4, and we just got back from a bike ride in Scotland, where we rode around the Inner Hebrides we did for about a week, but every night we played in these pubs, and he's really good. I he has to slow down and slow down for me, and I don't know have nearly the repertoire he does. But then we actually connected with a guy who I'd known when I was stationed over there 35 years ago, who was 18 years old and 16 years old at the time, a good 16-year-old fiddle player, better than I was at the time. Now he's one of the top fiddle players in Scotland, and my son can sit down and play with him all day.
Oh,
Um,
that's great.
but the thing that, when was the last time you spent 2 weeks alone with either of your kids? I've never done that before.
Yeah.
And I just spent 2 weeks with my son, no other kids there, not my wife. I realized that's the most time I've ever spent with him in his or my entire life. And it was really pretty neat.
That's a great, yeah, that's pretty cool right there.
So
That is great.
he's also an avid reader. He's also an avid fiddle player, and he's an avid athlete apart from being a SEAL. And interestingly enough, he in the personality profiles, Myers Briggs or DISC, he's exactly
Yep.
the opposite of me.
So is there complementarity
I guess. I
dynamics
mean,
or
yeah,
yeah?
I'm an ENFP and Myers Briggs. He's an ISTJ. Maybe
Gotcha.
he may be an F or a P. I don't know, but anyway, in DISC, I know in DISC he's the opposite of those. But anyway, we part of that I think has led to us get along just fine. My wife is also the opposite of me.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. How's your golf game?
Right now, after the game I had yesterday, it sucks. I've got to go. I mean, but if you'd asked me that 3 days ago, I said, "Hey, man, I'm on the." So I've got to go. I've got to go do some work on it, and figure out how to build a better um, prep routine for each shot. Because I'll talk to myself, and then I'll go and not do the stuff that I told myself to do, and pay the price. So I think just
Yeah,
it's probably the same thing most guys have, or most golfers, men or women. They just um, how do you get your head in the right space for each shot, and then not and just go for it. So I got some work to do before I play again after yesterday's game.
what do you think your approach will be to get ready for the next time you play?
Uh, well, one, I think I'll go back and reread some of the chapters in your book, and then it's just I think there's probably one or two swing thoughts I need to just pay attention to, put them into my practice swing routine, and then just pay attention to one of them when I actually do my swing.
Yeah, that seems to be a very good approach. I know I was having a conversation today with a young player. Who's going to go play Division One golf, and she was talking about, or we were having this conversation about the value of making all your decisions back here before you play, and then almost creating this imaginary space, this what we call the play box, where no thinking is happening, but rather you're the athlete that you want to channel, right? And that's it. And so maybe you bring one little thing in there with you, but that's it. And so you're not standing over the ball and you're not dwelling over the shot and I don't know if I could do this, it's this thing,
I
so
wonder whether you were thinking like the rest of us, watching Tom Kim stand over his drive. Did you watch the tournament on
I
TV?
did. It was the Travelers, right?
Yeah, yeah, and standing over his putts, and then commenters going, "What's he doing? He's just standing there," and he was doing the same thing over his drives. And I postulated that he was just shutting down the voices in his head, waiting until it all shut down, and then making his swing. But what he was doing was working. No, there was no doubt about that.
I think that what we see when players at that level are dwelling over a shot for a long time, they're so good at what they do. They're not battling thoughts like we do as amateurs. They've already committed. They know what they're searching for, some kind of a feeling or a go trigger that's like, oh, okay, I'm settled, I'm ready, and I can go. I mean, Jack Nicklaus talked about that. Man, think about Jack Nicklaus years ago. Watching him, he would spend 45 seconds over the shot. It was forever.
Wow.
I don't think that serves most amateurs very well, though.
No, boy, yeah. So I've got to find a good routine. And sometimes when I'm standing over the thing and I'm trying to think through all these things, and then I hit a bad shot, I kind of go, now I need to just walk up and just hit the ball. And sometimes I do that, and I hit a great shot. And go, okay, I got it. And then I'll do that again, and it'll, and it won't go where I want it to go. So uh, having a good routine is something I have not yet accomplished that works most of the time. And everybody tells me, like yourself and others, come up with a good routine to get yourself into a pattern to where you're calm down and you do. And that's what I got to work on.
I think that's very worthwhile. It's a very worthwhile endeavor. I think that I was at we're having this conversation this week at this event that I was at, and the conversation was about, all right, okay, how many people here practice their pre-shot routine? And one or two hands out of 100 people go up, and it's like, all right, there's your opportunity. You have to practice the pre-shot routine, and it's like every step, every hand movement, every little set. I think that might serve you well.
There's no doubt, and that requires a commitment and a sense of discipline that I'll have to work on.
Yeah, I get it. That's great. Well, I know you're going to figure it out. I know that.
Oh yeah, I'll figure it out for one game.
And there'll be joy.
Yeah, well, there's joy anyway. I mean, one of the things we do I play at a Navy course mostly, and usually about 5 or 6 holes in, we have to stop because they play the national anthem. And so you stop where you're at and you face the direction where the national anthem is coming from. Take hat off, put over your heart. It's just something you do on a military base. But while I'm there, I'm just looking around and kind of going, aren't I lucky to be being here right now with these people in this place at this time doing this? And I spend that minute and a half or however long it is, just to kind of just savor being here right now. And I think that's golden. And we're kind of forced to do that because when they yell colors and people all over the golf course stop, you can see on the other fairways over there, everybody stopped. They're facing that direction. They got their hat up. And I'm kind of looking up. I see the birds in the trees and the wind. And aren't I lucky to be here? And that by itself is pretty magical.
Mm. Yeah, that is fantastic. And I was lucky enough to experience that with you, Bob.
Well, we'll have to do it. We'll have to do it again. I had an opportunity through a friend of mine to play La Jolla Country Club last week, and which is a very pretty course. And for a mere $500,000, I could join that club. But
I would think about it. I have to sell a few more books, Bob.
Yeah,
I have to sell a few more of these.
I did. It was a nice course, and an interesting course. But I still like my local Navy courses and the munis that I play. So
that's awesome. Well, that's great. Well, Bob, listen, I appreciate the chance to do this. I know there's lots of great discussions ahead for you and I in the future. Can't wait to get together live and play some golf and have some more of these great conversations. But I appreciate coming on the podcast today and having some conversation around this. This has really been a lot of fun for me.
Well, one last thing as I find that that it's my decision to only be a mediocre golfer. I mean, 18 to 20 handicap, because I could be better if I gave up my cycling, if I gave up my this, if I did that, and so. Because I have a friend of mine who's just taken golf up again after giving it up, and he's playing 4 or 5 days a week, and he's getting better faster than I am. And so, but I'm it's kind of like I'm choosing to be as good as I can be playing once or twice a week.
Of course. I think that's a great way to look at it. I think the idea of, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to, is a rather adult level approach to a lot of these things that we enjoy doing. So,
and I think one of the real
totally.
joys of golf is just being out there with friends, and we enjoy each other's great shots. We feel pain when our good friend has a shank or tops it, 30 yards ahead of the tee, and it's all just part of the fun of it. And people say, I don't play golf because I'm no good at it. So nobody's any good at golf if you're not on the PGA or something. That's not what it's about.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And look, everyone wants to play a little better. We can all decide how much we want to invest to get better and play better. That's number one. Number two, it's a lot easier to learn how to struggle less so that you can enjoy it more. And I think that's kind of the fun part of the game. Plus, it's such a great analogy for how we live our lives and how we show up for the things that are important for us in our lives as well.
Have you heard of the book? Did you ever read the book Golf in the Spirit by Scott Peck?
I haven't. There's a couple that are sort of in that genre, but I haven't read
He's the guy
that.
who wrote The
Golf in
Road
the
Less
Spirit.
Traveled.
Yeah.
And he was not a great golfer, probably from 25 handicap. But his whole book is about golf as an analogy for life. You might find it.
Golf is life.
I read it a long time ago. I have a copy. It's another one of those books I ought to read again.
All right. I'm going to put that on my list also.
Okay.
All right. Hey, great stuff today, Bob. Great to see you. Looking forward to coming out to San Diego and Imperial Beach and running around the SoCal Metroplex, if you will, in the coming months, hopefully. So fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Bob. We'll talk soon. All right.
Yep. Look forward to it.
All right, so that's going to be a wrap on today's podcast. I want to thank Bob Schoultz for joining me. Bob is in my mind anyway, a bit of a legend, guy that I aspire to be like. He has been out of the Navy SEALs for quite some time, continues to stay on a really incredible growth path. The guy never, ever stops learning. One of the most well-read individuals that I've ever met. And super inspiring. Loved our conversations around Navy SEAL ethos. And hey, look, who knew that a philosopher from Stanford could be a Navy SEAL? Not everybody looks like Marcus Luttrell or Jocko Willink if you're in the Navy SEALs. So great conversation with Bob. I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to chat with Bob again. So once again, I'm Paul Monahan. I want to thank you for spending time with me on the Most Important Game podcast. And, my mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best by focusing on your inside game, not just your outside game. And if you want to learn more about me or the work that I do, you can visit my website. It's paulmonahan.com. You can find my new book, The Most Important Game, at the website there. It's available in hardcover and paperback, as well as Kindle and Audible for those that like to listen. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoyed the conversation, definitely hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure you hit the follow button. Just a special shout out to our producer, Kevin Monahan, working behind the scenes, pulling all the levers. Thanks, Kev, for your work. And until next time, remember, don't give up. It's possible, no matter the arena that you're performing in, for you to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more.